Thank
That's
you.
done.
Team effort. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Tara. I am Melissa Esplin. I live in Utah. So I'd love to see where everybody's coming from in the chat. It'd be great. So let's talk about calligraphy a little bit. I am really excited about it. I first started calligraphy when I was in 7th grade. We had an art teacher who gave us these broad edge pens. They were fountain pens and said, okay, here's some gothicized italic, go for it. And there was no instruction, but I had so much fun. And it started this. I mean, I've really loved letters for a long time before that, but I was so excited to learn this calligraphy medium and how to make different lines, like line weights, appear with just one pen and with one singular stroke. So, yeah, fast forward to my college days, I learned how to use a computer and stopped hand lettering. And then the financial crisis of 2008 happened, and it put our whole world upside down. And it was then that my mom gave me this Atkinson sign painting reference book that was my great great grandfather's. He was a calligrapher and sign painter in Ogden, Utah. And it was this aha moment that I needed to bring myself back to the analog art form. So I started pointed pen calligraphy, and which is what we're going to touch on today. And I was terrible at it. I was really, really bad. I made every single one of the mistakes that you can make with calligraphy. So, it's been a few years since 2008. I've had a few years experience. So when you're making strokes and they don't look like what you have envisioned them in your head, don't get frustrated by it. Everybody makes mistakes. Just like Tara said, we're just gonna roll with them. And you'll see me make mistakes, and I'll call them out as I see them so that you can see that mistakes are okay. And if you come away with the work from this workshop today with making a few strokes you're really proud of, let's focus on that. So calligraphy can be one of those really soothing things, but it can also be one of those things that a lot of people get really, really frustrated by. So we want to focus on the soothing and meditative aspects of calligraphy, and less the perceived what we are supposed to do with our calligraphy. So we're going to have fun with it today, and we're going to learn some techniques, but we're also going to hopefully finish a project that everyone can feel proud of. So I'm going to switch cameras so you can see just down below. The sun is finally coming out right now, so I'm gonna change my focus and my exposure just a little bit. So we are going to work on this little hocus pocus card. It's a lot of fun. There are a few things going on here, a few techniques that are going on here. One, we've got the stylized Romans that's happening here in the hocus pocus. And then we have we're using the thicks and thins of our pen in order to create texture on our letters and in order to illustrate and create depth on our illustrations. So we're going to really work on understanding the mechanics of the pointed pen, and hopefully that'll give you some confidence. So as you push forward to different calligraphy styles, which I really hope after today, each and every one of you will consider just keeping your calligraphy supplies a little closer and open them up a little bit more often. If you haven't done that before, I really hope that you dive in headfirst to the world of calligraphy. It is really, really so much fun. Okay.
On that note,
yeah.
On that note, Melissa, when you were talking about that book, Paula was asking what the name of the book was that you were talking about during your intro.
It's called Atkinson Sign Painting Book. It's out of print. I have it right here.
Ooh.
Sometimes you can find it on eBay, but this is what it is. Isn't that gorgeous?
Oh my God, I'm obsessed.
And look at all the cool styles that are happening here. We're just
Oh
gonna
my
nerd
God,
out
that
for a
Art
second.
Nouveau stuff is amazing. I love it.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Like just absolute, like it was this aha moment. It was almost transcendent. And I don't know if you can see over here, this right here
Mm-hmm.
is part of my family tree that my
Oh,
great great grandmother had written down just
in this book.
after in this book. So it just felt like, oh my gosh, I
Right.
need this. And this, she wrote this down literally 2 weeks after my grandpa, who is now 99 years old, was born. So yeah, it's just kind of a fun artifact
For
from
sure.
my family. And look at that script. Isn't that
Oh,
so
it's
pretty?
gorgeous.
So gorgeous. Yeah. So Atkinson Science Painting book, they there were lots of different versions of this that came out. So it's actually not uncommon to find them on eBay, but they are going to set you back a few $100.
Okay. Well, that was a
Okay.
treat. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. I always I always love an excuse to pull that out and show people because it's too neat. It's so fun. Okay, so first things first, let's pull out our handouts, the pointed Romans, and let's start prepping our nib. So there it is widely debated on how people prep their nibs. And let me just tell you, there really isn't a wrong way to prep your nib, but I certainly like the lazy way. I'm a lazy gal. So whatever's the easiest. What I'm going to do here is, you see these little teeth on the inside here? I'm going to stick the nib on the outside of those teeth. So it just looks like that. You see that? Okay, I'm going to stick that in and just shove it down. Sometimes it helps. You'll see how there's a break in this metal insert right here. Sometimes it helps to have the edge of the nib along one of those breaks, just so that it's a little easier to push in. Now, if you're having problems, this is where I should have put it on my supply list, but I have these pliers that I like to use. They're like a jewelry plier. And you can grab the shoulder of the nib with the plier, or really any kind of plier, but I just like how these are short, the short little nose, and I just shove it in there. So I shove it in there. This is a Hunt 22 or Speedball 22B. And I'm coming in and shoving it in just to about the numbers that are written on there. So I want to have it pretty solidly in there, so I'm not getting any up and down flexion. I'm really only worried about the flexion of the 2 points coming out. We want the tines to flex outward. So see how those tines split in half? We want those to split. And they also, let's talk about the anatomy real quick. I'm going to switch over to this view. And we have right here, this is our vent. So this vent, this hole in here, that is, the reason for that is to help regulate the ink flow. So if we don't cover this vent with ink, there's nothing regulating the ink flow, so it's going to drip out. So if you've ever had problem with your ink just blobbing out and you're just frustrated by it, it's typically because the ink has just blobbed out. So that's definitely one thing. And then you'll see, I don't know if you can tell from this video, there's a slit on either side of this shoulder here, just before the vent. That's on purpose. That's just to help give it a little bit more flex. This is a really great beginner nib because the point isn't too sharp, but you still get a really fine hairline, but you still have enough flex that you can create some really dramatic thicks and thins. So, and by dramatic, I mean high contrast. So very thin hairlines and very thick shades or downstrokes without splattering all over the place. Like it's kind of in between. Typically, if you're looking at a really flexible nib, it's going to splatter and the tines are going to catch on the fibers of the paper on those upstrokes and cause these flicks of ink everywhere. But if it's not very flexible, you have stability on the upstrokes, but not a whole lot of drama. So there are give and take from each and every nib that's been manufactured. And this is kind of the sweet spot. The 22B is my go-to nib. It works in most scenarios. So this is the one that I like to work with the most. Yeah, I like using a straight holder when we're doing illustrative things like we're going to do today. So first things first, we've got the nib in the holder. Now we're going to prep it. So this is where things get a little, just roll with me here on this one. So there are a few ways to clean off your nib, and you can use alcohol, you can use soap, you can use a flame, although I don't recommend it because sometimes it can affect the flexibility and the longevity of a nib, or you can use your spit. So I'm lazy. I don't always have rubbing alcohol with me. I don't always have soap and water with me, and I don't even always have matches on me. So I always have my spit on me, so I'm super lazy. So I'm gonna go off camera so you don't see me sticking this in my mouth, but I'm going to put my spit on it, and then I'm going to wipe it off with a paper towel that I have over here. And effectively what I'm doing here is wiping off that manufacturing residue that keeps the nib from rusting. So I'm washing that residue off. So now I'm creating a surface on the nib with which it can accept the ink. Now it also means that the nib is now vulnerable to rust. So you want to make sure that you dry off your nib after you use it and that you clean your nib. However, the nibs will typically get a little bit more texture as they've been broken in, and they hold the ink better, hold the ink longer, so you can go more strokes without dipping your ink into the ink jar. So, so it's just kind of some give and take. It's okay if there's a little bit of rust, but you definitely don't want the rust on the point of the nib. So we only ever clean our nibs just before use. So this nib here, I'm not going to be using in our workshop today, unless something very dramatic happens, but I'm not going to clean this off until I'm ready to use it. So yeah, so I've got that all cleaned off. And now I'm going to dip my pen into my jar of ink. There we go. And this ink is very well constituted. It doesn't like separate into like water and pigment particles, which is really nice. But I do tend to swirl it around to make sure that it's all on there. Okay, so let's look at this and see how covered. I have covered the nib fully with ink. You see the vent is completely covered. There's no opening over the vent, and it's like it's coating it evenly. If your ink is bubbling up and creating little droplets on top of the nib, that means your nib hasn't been cleaned off all the way. That manufacturing oil residue is still on there. So you'll want to remove, clean that again. You want it to be completely smooth all the way on there. And I like to dip my pen like this. Let's bring this over here a little closer. Dip it past the vent. And then I do this little stabbing motion over the ink jar just to flick any excess ink off. If I dip it all the way and I don't, I'm left with a little bit of excess ink, and I can end up dripping ink and making like just an inky mess. So I want to just stab the air over the well just to get that little excess off, and do that just about every time. Okay, so I'm just going to demonstrate grip real quick. So I'm cleaning off my nib so that we can demonstrate grip. Hopefully we have some lefties today. I'm very passionate that both left and right-handed calligraphers can do great work. There's nothing stopping you from doing great work just because you were born left-handed. My great-grandmother was left-handed and her school teachers tied her left hand behind her back. So the tradition of left-handed calligraphy is actually quite new. But I am happy to demonstrate both left and right-handed, even though I'm classically a right-handed person. I will demonstrate lefty just so that you understand exactly how you should be holding the nib and orienting yourself to the artwork. So I'm going to open up to the second page here, and looking at these essential strokes. So I'm right-handed. I'm going to do the tripod grasp. Lefties do this as well. Actually, I've got a second pen. I'm going to demonstrate my grip just together. So I am holding the pen in between my index finger and my thumb. And I want to have this vent pointing up towards the sky. I want it up towards the ceiling. So I want to have that nice and oriented so that the shoulders are evenly distanced from the paper. Okay, so I've got my index finger and my thumb. I'm creating this almond shape with my index finger and my thumb. And the pen is actually resting on this knuckle here. This is where I want the pen to rest. I don't want the pen to rest here in the pit because that's going to change the orientation of my grip. I want it to be right there resting on top of the knuckle. Okay, and then my middle finger is going to tuck back behind and rest underneath my index finger and my thumb. So this is called the tripod grasp. You're really using your 3 fingers for the bulk of the work. That's really all you're using. Your ring finger and your pinky finger just tuck behind, okay? So I'm going to, and then what you want to do, especially with a straight holder, with an oblique holder, it's a little bit different. I'm rotating my wrist down to touch the page. So what you technically could do, I don't, you could get a quarter and rest a quarter on your wrist, and that's how you want to write. So because I am oriented like this with my right hand, I need to rotate my paper, and so that my paper is aligned to my downstroke. So if I'm writing a downstroke this way, I need to have my pen aligned with it that way. Does that make sense? Let's do this. So I'm aligning my pen exactly to the downstroke. Okay, this angle line that's happening. Right? So if I were to try and make a really thick downstroke, but I have it not oriented properly, no matter how hard I press my tines, I'm not going to have a super thick stroke, but sideways I'll have a thick stroke. We don't want that. We want our downstroke to be the thickest stroke. So this paper is bleeding just a little bit, but that's okay. This is our practice paper. We're not really concerned too much about this paper. So I want to press down and pull down towards me. Press down and pull down towards me. I'll demonstrate that lefty. So I dip my nib. Ooh, got a little too much ink on there. And I'm going to press down and pull down. Ooh, come on. Towards me. And I'm not using my fingers to pull, I'm using my whole arm to pull. You're not seeing my fingers move a whole lot unless I'm doing really small detail work. So I'm just pulling down, and I'm making sure that these tines are equally distanced or equally weighted as I'm pulling down. Cassie says her nib is dipped in ink and she can't get any of the nib to come out on the paper when I pull down. It's possible. so this ink, it dries pretty quickly. It's not too fast, it's not too slow, it's really just in between. But if you hesitate really at all between dipping and drawing, oftentimes the tip will get a little bit dried, like right here. See how I just waited a little bit and now the tip doesn't. So I'm just gonna dip just a little bit, rehydrate that end right there, and then I can pull the rest of the ink down. So that very fine point can oftentimes get crusty, for lack of a better word, and you'll just have to rehydrate it. No big deal. Even if you're not feeling like dipping it all the way, you can just rehydrate it in the thickest part of a swell from one of these downstrokes over here, and then keep writing. See, there we go. That was able to get me the stroke that I needed. Okay. So I have a little bit of water right here on the side, and I'm just going to clean my nib off real quick in between explanations, because I don't want the nib to get dried with the ink on it. Ray says that he doesn't recommend cleaning the nib with your spit. Again, like I mentioned, this is a hot button topic. Everybody's got an opinion. That's just what I do, and there are so many ways to clean your nibs. I personally haven't had any issues with colonies growing in my ink, but I live in Utah where it's really dry and we don't have mold problems. So that's just my personal experience, but I do appreciate you sharing your point of view. And I think there are just so many ways to really do calligraphy, and I love other perspectives, and I think it's really great to include those. So thanks so much for sharing that, Ray. I really appreciate it. So we're going to focus on these basic strokes. These basic strokes, or essential strokes, that we have right here. These strokes are really suited for building up this particular alphabet. And what I want to draw your attention to is this top alphabet that's in color. You'll see that I have a magenta version of the letter, and then I have a blue version or a cyan version of the letter. And what I'm trying to depict is showing you the skeletal structure, which is in magenta. That's the skeletal structure of the letter. And then the blue part is the strokes that describe the skeletal structure. So what you can do, and what I do, and what I would highly, highly recommend, is that you write in pencil and you draw things out. So the master penmen from 200 years ago, they would write everything in pencil. They wrote everything in pencil, and you can see their pencil markings. And so one of the things that I would recommend is, if it's good enough for a master penman from 200 years ago, it's good enough for me. So I'm definitely going to use pencil stroking, and I'm going to write things out. So first things first, let's work on this first essential stroke here. This is a top left to bottom right stroke. So this is basically the what is it called? The downstroke of the A. So this is the most dramatic stroke of the letter A. It's top left to bottom right. And you'll notice that in the entire alphabet and in classical alphabets, that you want to have your stroke shading, your stroke structure, always on the top left to the bottom right whenever you have a diagonal stroke. So top left to bottom right on the M. So this is where we have the shade, this is where we have the shade, right? On the W and the V, we have the top left to bottom right, top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right. So you'll see the only letter where we don't have the top left to bottom right is that Z. So the Z structure is really where, I mean, if we have it on the top and the bottom, there are letters that do that, but it's not really conducive to the style that we're working towards today. So we break a rule and we have it on the top right to bottom left. That said, if you mess up and you're like, ah, crud, I put the shade structure on the wrong side, you know what? Nobody's going to get after you. We're all going to appreciate it. And here's the thing with hand lettering, you know, there's a font for everything, but that hand lettering approach, that visceral, like organic touch that we can approach to a hand card is going to make our loved ones just go over the moon. It means so much more. So including our mistakes actually increases the value of the project altogether. So let's embrace those. Okay, the letter A, we're going to do this top left to bottom right. We're starting off by using a very nice hairline. We're starting off with very little shade, very little pressure. And we're going to go, we're starting off with a little lightness and we're ending with a little lightness. So I'm going to go a little bit bigger so that you can see it better. I'm going to use this grid paper. And I'm going to just go along this diagonal here, just so that we can visualize it more easily. So I'm applying pressure really only on that downstroke, and I'm leaving the hairlines. I'm really applying pressure here and tapering here and here. So this is the thickest part of our structure. Everything else is a nice hairline, okay? We can practice this vertically, and we can just do a vertical light, dark, light, light, dark, light. And we want to try and keep it as balanced as possible. Light, dark, light. And see if I want to change the angle, I'm changing the orientation of my paper. Light, dark, light. So we're just applying pressure and relieving pressure as we're pulling down. We have so much strength and power pulling everything down. Light, dark, light. Okay, so we're going to work on this next stroke, which is almost like a bracket. So what we're doing is this structure here is light. This structure here is light, and in between is where we have our shade. Light, dark, light, light, dark, light. I'm really just pulling my whole arm down. I'm using the strength of my upper arm to control my nib. Light, dark, light. Okay, now we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to have it curving to the left. Light, dark, light, light, dark, light, light, dark, light. Okay, how are we doing? So this is where we're going to bring this structure and make it more noticeable. We're going to create a half circle. And this is where, using your grid paper, so the dots are great or the grid is great, either one, you'll create a box. I'm going to create a square. So for the sake of my demonstration, my square is going to be 5 boxes wide by 5 boxes tall. And I'm drawing the outline of the stroke, and I really want you to visualize things with your pencil, visualize with your mind. That's really great to create these structures within a grid line, because the more you can visualize it, the easier it becomes to repeat it with your muscles. So I'm going to start just rounding this out. And it's okay that I don't have a perfect circle. So I've got this nice stroke. Okay, so notice at the bottom and the top, we have kind of a flat spot. Not really, but kind of. This flat spot is what we want to have. We want to emphasize a flatness. So we don't want to create a pointy, we want to emphasize a little bit of horizontal space before coming down, applying pressure around and over and flattening this out as well. And then we go from inside the previous stroke, we pull horizontally, apply pressure, and move in. So you see how I emphasize a little bit on this horizontal, and it creates a nice circular shape. So those are two different strokes. One's counterclockwise, one's clockwise, hemisphere. And by creating this nice little horizontal, we kept the oval like really smooth and unified. Now let's try it without that, just so you can see the difference. So if I just go straight down from this middle part, that ink got a little dry there. Okay, there we go. If I just start like that, then we have more of an almond shape, and that's okay. But the almond shape is going to have just this pointy spot, and this is where the eye stops. So we want to round that out so we have a nice continuous shape. Okay. All right, so let's move on to our next bit, and let's make some letters. Let's understand the letter structure. So I'm going to do the letter A. I'm going to do it 3 boxes tall and about 3 boxes wide, 2.5. This is based on Roman ratios. So the letter A is technically like 3/4 of a square, so it's not quite fully square. The B is also 3/4. The C is almost a full square. The D is a full square. So if you put your grid squares over your letters, you should be able to see the guides. But honestly, we're not too concerned about proportions today. I do want you to understand that I don't want you to get hung up with the proportions, rather just enjoy the letter making together, because the proportions we can focus down the line as we get more and more obsessed with calligraphy, which I hope you really do. So I've got my letter A structure here, and I'm going to do, every skinny stroke is going to be an upstroke or a sideways stroke. Every thick stroke is going to be a downstroke. That's really where we're going to be with this today. So you can, if you feel that you have more power, you can do a downstroke and keep that a hairline. So I can do a downstroke here. If I'm like, I just need more power and confidence, I'm going to do a downstroke here and just keep it nice and light. And that's okay. You can totally do that. Then from here, I'm going to do that, what is it called? It's a swelled stroke. I'm creating a slight curvature at the top. I'm covering over this hairline here, and I'm applying pressure, and then I'm bringing it out. So that's nice and thick. And then I'm coming in next to it and creating another stroke, but I'm going the opposite direction because I want to create this serif here on the bottom. This is called a serif. This is the foot, and I can branch it out on this side as well. So a trick about serifs is that they are either horizontal or they're vertical. They're not ever, for example, like the S. Let's do the S. So let's draw it first. The S is typically half as wide as it is tall, or 2/3 as wide as it is tall. So this is our letter S. We're going to create the strong downstroke first. So I'm going to start over here, create that hairline up here, and then apply pressure, release to a hairline and up. Okay. And then I'm going to just come along here and copy that same stroke underneath it. Give myself some room to breathe on either side. Okay. Instead of having my serifs this way at 90 degrees from my terminal line, I want to have it vertical. So I want to go vertical here and vertical here. Okay. And that's where I'm going to just draw a nice vertical line and curve it back in to that stroke. So vertical line here and curve it back into that main stroke. And there we've got the letter S. Let's talk about the letter W for a second. Let's talk about the letter W, and then we're going to work on our project, because we're going to learn a lot about the technique as we work on our project. But the W is really a double V. And let's look at this for a second. This W is not the same width as the A, and it's not the same width as the S. So you don't want to try and squish your letters to be the same width as everything else. Otherwise, it'll look weird. Sharon asked to demonstrate. I will do the W lefty so you can see exactly how we do it. So we want to start with the skeletal structure. I'm working my way from the top left to the bottom right. So I'm rotating my page so that I can orient my nib correctly, lefty. So I'm working with a straight pen and I'm doing a project like this, like the Hocus Pocus. I'm rotating my page all the time to make sure that my nib is in alignment with my downstrokes, with the strokes that I want to be the thickest. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to start off. I'm just going to re-wet that tip of my pen. And I'm going to start off with a little hairline. Oh, come on, come on. There we go. Come down to a point, lift, come up. Again, I'm not a natural lefty, so you'll see a lot of shakiness here, but I do want you to I want you to see the structure that I'm putting in here and where I'm aligning myself. I'm pulling my whole arm down and up. And then I can straighten myself out if I need to. I'm going to write the serif on this side. Ooh, the serif on this side. And I'm going to add my second stroke. And I'm going to add, my second stroke here. So you can see that W, as shaky as it is, it's still, I'm aligning my nib to those downstrokes by rotating my paper, which is one reason if you're used to writing a very specific way with your paper and you're orienting yourself exactly one way with your paper, it can be really, really frustrating to try and turn your paper, which is why we want to engage our left side of the brain by drawing things out beforehand. And then I could even take this stroke, turn it upside down, and draw upside down because I already have the stroke written and visualized for me. So the orientation of your paper doesn't quite matter as much. So the pencil is your power. And we can always erase it afterwards. Okay, so speaking of pencil work, in your optional supplies list, I mentioned a light pad. If you have a light pad, great. If you don't have a light pad, I hope you have a pencil with you. Just any regular pencil. I personally prefer it to be a little bit dull. If all you have is a mechanical pencil, that's totally fine too. We are going to transfer this artwork, the Hocus Pocus, on this last page onto our Arnhem paper, our nice, beautiful paper. And you'll notice a remarkable difference between this paper and your practice paper. Practice paper is great. You want to have plenty of it. Doesn't really matter the quality of it. But when it comes to a final project, it's good to have the good stuff. And that is, that's one of the supplies that I really don't cheap out on. Good paper will cover up a multitude of problems and mistakes. Yesterday I was working on a certificate with gold ink, and somehow when I was mixing my gold ink, it splattered onto the certificate, and I had a bit of a meltdown. I'll be honest. It was a little bit frustrating, but because it was a high quality paper, it was actually the same paper. I was able to lift it enough that you couldn't really tell. So, you know, my hours that I had worked on that certificate wasn't in vain. I didn't have to start all over again. So good quality paper is going to make a huge difference here. What we're going to do is grab our Hocus Pocus, and then on the other side, the reverse side, you'll see this red dotted line. This is where we want to put our graphite markings. So we just scribble. This is the best part of the whole workshop. We're just scribbling. The red dotted lines are really just a guide in case you couldn't see the front side of the paper, just to make sure that you have graphite over the whole image that we're going to work on. This is a really great trick. Somehow a lot of artists don't even know about how to use it. If you already know about it, you're basically 4 steps ahead of a lot of people. So I'm just laying down a fair chunk of graphite. If we're gonna get like into the weeds of the type of graphite that I'm using, this is a 5B pencil. So you want a softer pencil. That way you can really get a lot more graphite onto the paper quicker. But again, like I said, regular mechanical pencil also works. So here's where tape comes into play. I'm going to line this up with, do you see those, the square outline from the front? I'm going to line this paper up with that square, and I'm going to tape it down just so that it doesn't move around while I'm transferring my image. I'm using just washi tape, Scotch tape, any kind of tape. If you're using a Scotch tape that's like pretty powerful, pull the piece of tape and just get lint from your pants on top of it, so you have some lint on the adhesive so it doesn't destroy the surface of your paper. Okay, so I am going to turn this around, and you can use a ballpoint pen, maybe not, or a mechanical pencil, a regular pencil. It really doesn't matter too much, but do keep track of where you've been. And when it comes to writing down, say I'm trying to describe this thick stroke on the Hocus, I want to go down the center of that thick line, just so that I know to follow the center of it. So I'm going to draw these curves. And let's just double check to see our work. Do you see that on the other side? You can see my markings have transferred onto the other side. It's pretty light. We can easily erase it. But it really helps expedite this process without needing a light pad. And yesterday I was using a light pad on that certificate I was working on. And let me tell you, the sun came out and was super bright. It made it difficult to use the light pad. So this is nice that you don't have to have lighting just right in order to transfer an image well. So I'm writing everything down, Hocus Pocus. Hocus Pocus is really the most important part that I want to get spatially correct. So I'm writing all of those pieces down, really just drawing one line to describe each line. I'm not filling anything in. The quicker and the more simple we can be with it, the more we can play with it when we work on the final project. So I do want to have the circle here. I want the circle just right. I'm trying to make sure that I follow that circle pretty accurately. Okay, and I'm going to leave the stars alone. I'm not going to transfer the stars. And the reason for that is I want you to think about composition when we add those stars back in. I want you to think about where there's an empty space. I want you to think about the negative space. Oh, looks like I didn't put the crossbar on the H. I missed this spot, but that's okay. We got it.
Melissa, real quick, smooth side or rough side of the paper?
Oh, good question. Smooth side.
Thank you.
You can go rough side. There's no like, I'm not going to be so demanding that you have to have it on one side and you've messed up if you use the other. But using the smooth side will be a little easier when you're doing those thin hairlines in the upstrokes. So when I'm doing other work, I'll use, if I'm using any other type of paper, I want to look for a smooth paper, like a rough watercolor paper. It's a little tougher to work with. So I'm trying to use like a hot press. I'm trying to go as smooth as possible just so that those hairlines look better. But if you are really shaky, if you have a tremor in your hand, go for a rough press because then it hides all the tremors because the paper is so textured. So just a little side note. I appreciate you bringing that up for me. Okay, we're going to start off by drawing out Hocus Pocus with our pen. I'm going to just dip my nib into the water and clean it off because I had a little bit of a break and I don't want to clog up my nib too much. But let's take note real quick. This is a clean nib, right? It's not like it was when we first started. So don't expect your nib to look exactly like it was when it was brand new. Clean really just means getting the debris off of your nib. Okay, so I'm gonna go here and I'm aligning myself. I'm going to do a downstroke. So I wanna align this barrel of the pen to be in line with that H, okay? So I'm gonna come over here and draw a nice hairline, apply pressure, and release along that line, okay? And then I'm gonna draw a hairline, apply pressure, and release. Let's just work on the whole H. Okay, I'm gonna dip my nib, and then I'm going to work on all of these crossbars. I'm using a light touch, and I'm connecting those shapes together. Not too concerned, but I want to keep a light touch so that we have really good hairlines. And then from this, I want to have a nice, confident hairline, but I don't want to drag my pen through these rivers of wet ink. So I'm going to jump the banks of the rivers. So I start here on the right. I'm coming over to the left, jump over, and apply some pressure and curl that around. So we've got our H. We are making great progress. Okay, and then have you noticed there's a huge difference between the practice paper and the fine art paper? There's a huge difference. It feels amazing. You can go a little bit slower. The ink has a lot more control. It's really great. Okay, I'm gonna start with this O. I'm gonna start at the top with a nice hairline, working my way horizontally, create a nice horizontal stroke, then apply the pressure, come around and lift. Then I'm gonna come around on this other side and create the outside swell, coming in and kind of overlapping on that horizontal line, applying pressure, releasing and meeting back up. If you don't meet back up at this O, that's okay. The reason why we have this open structure is to allow for those missed connections, and it's okay. You can allow those connections to be missed and just embrace that openness of negative space, and it's totally fine. Now we're going to come in here and we're going to work our way down this. And what I want you to practice is look where you want the pen to go, or trace your eye along the curve that you want your pen to copy. So I'm looking at this outer curve as I'm creating the inner curve, and I'm following those lines. Then my pen is more likely to follow within that curve. So I'm going to start inset just a little bit, apply a little bit of pressure, and release. These aren't connected. They're just open. We've got this breathable space inside the O. Apply pressure, release, and open. Leave that open space on the inside of the O. Now we're going to start off with the C. I like to start with the serif just because I feel like it. You can do the serif last, it's totally fine. We're going to go with a hairline around the C. Apply pressure, release, and up. Now I moved my line just to the inside of the pencil line because I didn't want the C to interact with the O. I didn't want it to overlap. And if it overlaps, that's fine, but I didn't want to. So I made a split-second decision to change that up just a little bit, and that's okay. Your pencil lines are guidelines for you. They're not so bossy that you can't use your artistic judgment in the moment. Okay, I'm making that secondary downstroke, and then I'm going to connect with a curved line into that serif. I've got the C. We've got these lines starting to build up, and we're starting to see this composition come together. Okay, with the U, I want to start off strong with a nice downstroke, and then I taper just like I did with this, but I'm starting with a bit of a flat line that then decides to curve and flatten out. And this is where we're going to use our visualization skills yet again, where we go from the top, but our eyeballs are focused on this bottom part. Where your eye is where your hand wants to meet up. So I want you to do that, where we start at the top, strong, straight, and then curve and touch that bottom stroke and meet back up. And then we're going to create these echo lines where I'm strong downstroke and then taper out, don't touch. A strong downstroke, taper, and don't touch. Okay, now this U feels very undone. We need to add those serifs to it. We can connect those downstrokes together with our serifs. And if you need to touch up a little bit to create a nicer connection, you can do that. That's the beautiful thing about calligraphy, is you can come back after the fact and retouch your work. There's no one saying you can't. All right, with the S, we're going to start off with that serif, just like I did with the C, just because I like to. Come around here with a hairline. And this is where you may want to lift and orient your paper just a little differently, so you can pull this, because we want the serif, or sorry, not the serif, we want the downstroke, the thickest part of the shade, right here in the middle. So that's pointing kind of sideways. So we want that sideways pressure. So you kick your elbow out so you can align your brush, your pen, down, around, and up. And then we'll do our downstroke here too. Apply pressure, release. And then we can connect our serifs here. And I'm going to add a little downstroke here. Add a little bit more weight. The S is fun because you can create this thickness right there at the bottom instead of creating a serif. You can do either one. Okay, so we want to do the P just like the top of the H. We start off with a hairline, we apply pressure, and we release at a hairline. Start off with a hairline, apply pressure, release with a hairline. Make sure that they come close together, but you don't want them to touch all the way. Okay, and then we want to work our way around. We're doing the serif and the bowl of the P all at once. And then we're creating that echo space right there. And then we're crossing along the bottom to finish off our letter. I like doing these curved serifs when we're doing our curvy letters because it just works well together. It creates a little bit more personality. Okay, our O, start at that top with a horizontal hairline. Apply pressure, release that pressure as we work our way to a horizontal hairline again. Then we pull from that horizontal hairline just over from it. And we apply pressure. Then we release pressure. Ooh, look at how wonky that is. It's not cute, but you know what? It's okay. We're going to embrace this imperfection. It's totally fine. Going to create those echo strokes here and here. Maybe we turn this into a pumpkin because that kind of looks like a pumpkin. I'm going to think on that. We can add that later. Okay, hairline here for the C. We've done this letter before. We can build up on that confidence of experience. Create the echo line here. Taper, swell, taper, and then connect the serif. Okay, this is all repeating the same letters that we've practiced before. That's why it's kind of a fun project because you're repeating the same thing, but you don't want them to actually be the same. That's the thing that our eyes know, like, oh, this was hand done because the top and the bottom, the letters aren't the same. You don't have a repeat letter. So that is one of the things that really drew me to calligraphy, not just the letters themselves and how fun they are to make, but I'm not very flowery or descriptive with my words. You'll find that I struggle with my words sometimes. So when I write a thank you note to someone, it's dear so-and-so, thank you for this, love, Melissa. That's it. Like I really don't have more than that. My husband, he writes the best thank you notes. They are funny, they're heartfelt, they're clever, like unique, each one. But me, I'm just not, I'm like, I really am grateful, but I feel like a broken record. I feel like it's not enough. So by writing it out by hand, I feel like the sentiment is impacted even more. It's like, no, really, I am grateful because I drew it by hand. I took the time to say, thank you for this. So that's one of the reasons why I really do love calligraphy, is that it's an accentuation of even just the simplest words.
Melissa, we have a good question. Paula is asking, what if too much ink begins to flow? Any recoup?
Good question. If you have a paper towel like this, so if you notice, let's see if we can switch angles so you can see how much is puddling here. See on the S, there's quite a bit of puddling. Can't quite tell. So with that, you can just go in with like the smallest corner of your paper towel and dab it up. And your paper towel should like sop it up a little bit, which is good. Or you can get those ultra fine Q-tips. Like, you know, they're in the normal Q-tips, and then there's the really, really tiny Q-tips. You can get those really tiny ones, and they'll soak up that extra blob. And I'll use white ink to just go back in and correct my lines if I need to correct a line. But in order to avoid that, if you're having problems with it, those two things that we covered at the beginning, where you're dipping your nib and flicking or wiping off the excess before you write, or making sure that you cover the vent completely, that's going to keep your pen from blobbing too much. And if you're in the moment, you're like, it's starting to come out too fast, try to write faster if you can. This is terrible advice, because I really, as an instructor, I want you to go slow. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. However, there are some instances where if you write faster, then you can recover from a little too much ink flowing out. So hopefully that helped answer your question. Okay, so our last letter, and I am noticing that my pen, those hairlines are getting a little bit erratic and kind of crusty, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to go back in and hydrate my nib and clean it off with water. I live in Utah. It's dry, a very, very dry climate, especially in the winter. So oftentimes I actually have to add water to my ink to keep it at the right consistency. So if you're practicing for hours and hours on end and you're starting to get frustrated by your project, try adding just a couple of drops of water to your ink, and that may actually cure the problem. That may solve the problem. Okay, I'm gonna move my paper so that I can have good orientation with my nib, and I'm gonna move it again. So I wanna have just a nice, confident line coming down and around here. You can lift and move your pen. It's totally fine. I'm seeing a question about digging the pen and getting bits of paper in with your nib, and that happens. It's frustrating, but it happens. One of the best things you can do is use just a little less pressure, or make sure that you're not super upright. So the pitch of your pen, you want it to be more relaxed and like a shallow slope. That's not going to pick up as many fibers as if you had a higher slope. And then just making sure that you have the right orientation. So if you're aligned parallel to the downstroke, your nibs aren't going to pick up those fibers. But if you're aligned perpendicular to those strokes, so let's say if I were to try and write this direction and try to write a big stroke and then come to the side, your nib is acting like a set of tweezers, picking up particles. And you know what? It's not the worst thing in the world. You can always just wipe it off, dip it in water and wipe it off as you go. Because we all pick up paper fibers from time to time. It's totally normal. It's not just a beginner move. It happens to all of us. You just keep track of it and make sure that you're, if you do have fibers on your nib, that you're just picking them out as they crop up. Okay, so let's work on our broom. We have just a few minutes left. I want to look at my drawing just for reference. So here in the drawing, we've got this nice swell that happens here and a swell that happens here. So we're going to start with these thicker strokes first. Those are our foundational strokes for this particular drawing. And you can do a couple things. I just changed my orientation of my nib, see? And I didn't change the orientation of my paper. I just moved it so that the pen is resting on my knuckle here instead of my knuckle here. And that allows me to draw a thick stroke sideways. You can do that, or keep it in our regular orientation and rotate your paper. Either one, but because I know this is wet still, I want to change my orientation of my nib so that I'm not drawing on top of it. If you're concerned about that, just do it in segments and let each part dry as it goes. This is where it's helpful to work on a few different projects all at once. So I'm going to work away from my body, and I'm using my elbow as the fulcrum, and I'm creating this arc. So it's nice and easy to draw away from my body. I'm gonna light, press, light. And this stroke is light to dark and lift. I'm going to bring these two together and create the end of my broom. Okay, next part, we're going to create the top of the broom by just flicking our pen out like that. Just little couple of flicks here and there. This next step is basically doing zigzag strokes. So I'm just going down and up and down and up. Down, down and up, down and up. So I've got that done. Then I'm going to work on the outside of my brush, or of my broom, and work in. I can go this way, or I can rotate the paper and go towards myself this way. And I didn't quite follow my pencil markings, but that's okay. It's a broom. It's not rocket science. So we can go to the outside. I'm just gonna add these strokes as I come in. And now we've got our broom. Okay. Now we're going to do the outside oval, and then we can fill it in where we see we need just a little punch, little sparkle. So I'm going to draw very carefully along this curved line. If I have to lift up, that's okay. And I want to stay as accurate to that line as possible, but if I don't, it's fine. This is not high stakes. We want to be kind to ourselves. And the mission of today's project is to be creative and to do something creative with our day. Our mission is not to beat ourselves up over it not looking exactly the way that we wanted it to. We're being creative. Okay. I've got my oval done. Now I'm going to do the moon. I'm going to be mindful of what's wet. Pretty much everything is still a little bit wet. I don't want to put my hand over it. I just want to be careful. I'm going to do this outside part of the moon first.
Hey, Melissa. If you're like me and you put your hand or clothes and everything, because I'm covered in paint from projects last night, can you use a hair dryer or something else to dry the ink?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would I'm an impatient gal, but I'm also a lazy gal. So I might not feel the ambition to walk into my bathroom and use a hair dryer, but if I'm in a rush, I'm 100% going into the bathroom and using my hair dryer. It's 100% so great. You do want to be careful that you're not blow drying so close to the paper that you burn the paper, or that you push the pigment and create droplets. That could be a stylistic effect, right? If you do that, then it's like, well, how do we embrace this as part of the style and make this mistake birds, right? So just be careful when you're doing it that you're not pushing the ink around on the surface of the paper, that you're just allowing it to dry.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
And
we
then
have,
I have some
uh-huh.
other questions, and I just want to let you know that it's okay if we go a little bit over, but I'll let you finish. We can ask those towards the end.
Okay. So I'm going to finish off my moon and work on my star structure. So the star structure is really, really fun. I personally love to create these. It's a four-sided star. It's so much easier to draw than a five-pointed star by quite a bit. And we use the nib and the nib's line weight qualities to create some variety in it. So what I'm doing, I'll show you what I'm visualizing on another piece of paper so that we can work on it together. I am visualizing the letter T or a cross, whatever you feel comfortable with. And what I'm doing is I'm starting at the top and I'm working actually counterclockwise and I'm swooping. So I start at this top point and I swoop to the left. And then I swoop down and a stop. And then I swoop to the right and then I swoop up. And the cool thing about this particular action is that it creates some variety. So sometimes the top is a little higher than the bottom, or the left is a little bit longer than the right. And it creates this almost visual effect of stars twinkling. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to apply the same technique that every downstroke is thick and everything else is thin. That paper was not controlling my ink very well. So we're going to do that. That's what we're going to focus on here, is we're going to go heavy down, light to the side, heavy down, light to the side, and up. And we're doing this in various sizes and positions. And notice we left this opening right there, but I don't want to put my hand over the sort of drawing hocus pocus, right? Like it's still kind of in its fragile state, even though the top surface may be technically dry, the underneath might not be. So I don't want to cover my hand in it. So I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees and I'm just going to do the same thing, just upside down. And I'm going to do it within this shape right here. Okay, so we've got our nice little stars and they're a little wonky and that's perfect. Those stars are great and wonky. We can add little dots, open dots or closed dots. And then we can also add dots on our lines, on our hairlines. You don't want to add, one of the basic rules of flourishing is that you don't connect two thick strokes together. But thin and thin are okay, and thin and thick are okay. But thick and thick don't, because it creates this bullseye target effect that draws the eye there and it doesn't move anywhere else. So I can draw a little line here. Maybe here. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at this almost, if you defocus your eyes and look and see where there's blank space, you're almost looking for these little vacancies here, just here and there. And I'm trying to be pretty careful about how I'm integrating it with Hocus Pocus. The thing about Hocus Pocus, which is great, is that you don't have any L's that could be confused for I's. So if you're doing any other type of text in here, if you have an L, try not to put a dot directly above it because then it could turn into an I. Or even a U, if you put a dot over it, it could look like an I, or even get confused for an umlaut over it, right? So we want to make sure that our letters still stay legible while adding the decoration around it. And we're done. and it's just such a fun little card. The more you practice it, the faster it comes, and you could get a lot of these done in an afternoon. So my challenge to you is to take this beyond our class, create one, or finish what we did in class today and send it to someone. There's a book called Keep Going by Austin Kleon, and it's a book that takes you through the creative process and how to get out of a slump. And it's really, really great. Highly recommend it. Quick read, like maybe take an hour to read through it. It's a fun book. One of his pieces of advice is to get in touch with your gifts, make gifts. So give things away, make things and give them away in order to get in touch with your skill set and the things that you're excited about. So hopefully you'll get around to gifting this to someone, anyone, or even just hanging it up and putting it in a frame. Take ownership of the things that you've completed, and call yourself an artist. Embrace that. You did a piece of art today. You are all artists, and I hope you take these techniques and run with them. And if you have any questions, please address them to me now or find me on social media. I'm on social media. I'm happy to answer questions there too.
Thank you, Melissa. That was awesome. What was the title of that book again? We have some, Keep Going by Austin Kleon. Okay, somebody else answered the question. That's great. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get into the ones we didn't get to. Anastasia asked, what are some good alphabets for beginners to practice?
Great question. There's a lot of debate around this in calligraphy realms. So if you're interested in calligraphy, first and foremost, I highly recommend, I'm going to tout my classes I teach online at calligraphy.org, and I start off with the basics. But if you're not quite wanting to pull the trigger on a class, I do recommend joining IAMPETH, IAMPETH. It's short for the International Association of Master Penmen, Engrossers, and Teachers of Handwriting. It's a wonderful organization with a ton of visual resources for artists to look at, but also links to classes. We have conferences every year, so you can come and stay for a week and learn as much as you can in a week. The conferences really, I can't recommend them more because they are so wonderful. And everyone there, you're getting the best calligraphers in the world concentrated in one place. So if you can, I say make the conference work. But it has a wealth of online resources that you can take advantage of and learn from there. But an alphabet specifically that you can learn from, a lot of people highly recommend doing Uncial, UNCIAL. It's a single case alphabet, so you're only worrying about each letter. You're not worrying about uppercase and lowercase versions, so it's a little bit easier to get into. It's typically a broad edge hand, but it can be interpreted in a pointed pen way. But there is kind of this pointed pen world and the broad edge world. So broad edge is like Gothic, Gothicized italic. Pointed pen is what we think of when we think of modern calligraphy, copperplate calligraphy, or engrosser script. So it kind of depends upon where you're going. If you're going the pointed pen route and you're wanting to get started, but you're feeling kind of intimidated, start with a penmanship class. If you're wanting to dive into the thicks and thins a little bit more, I highly recommend, so my modern calligraphy class, it's modern, where it's a modern take on copperplate and engrosser script. I'd highly recommend that if you're going the pointed pen route. So yeah, if you're not quite sure after this, feel free to reach out to me with your goals, your specific goals, and I can direct you in a path that will help you out.
Thank you, Melissa. That was awesome. All right. Okay. All right. So I just want to go back to Michelle's question. If 22 is a beginner's nib, what are other nibs, or how can I learn more about nibs? Would that be the same resources that you were just talking about?
Each class, my classes, I talk about different nibs, their strengths, their weaknesses in my classes. If you're going for something a little bit more advanced, you want a little bit more drama, I highly recommend the Hunt 99. It's another one of Speedball's nibs. It's about the same size, but you can create some incredibly dramatic thicks and thins. It can be a little bit fussier on the upstrokes, so you have to have a shallower pitch. And I'm seeing I have a question about getting upstrokes a little bit better. That pitch is going to make a huge difference. So if you just rake out your pen just a little bit farther, let me change views so you can see. So if I'm up here and I'm trying to make an upstroke, it's going to skip a lot more. But if I rake that pen out just a little bit, even if I just move back on my grip just a tad, not as dramatic as I'm doing now, but if you just hold back on that a little bit, then doing an upstroke and thinking butterfly thoughts, you're not going to have as much of an issue. But yeah, the Hunt 99 is another favorite of mine. Yeah, I'd recommend trying to find a sampler. It just depends upon what kind of calligraphy you're after. But in my class, I cover the different types of nibs and visually what they look like and how that affects the style of your work.
You mentioned the sampler. That's a really good point, because Speedball makes different sets that are geared towards specific things, like nibs for sketching, nibs for calligraphy, nibs for cartooning. So we do have a calligraphy set, which likely has the 22 in it already, but it's got
it's got a lot of broad edge ones.
Okay.
So if you're after like the pointed pen and you want a sampler in the pointed pen, Speedball's mapping sampler.
Oh, interesting. Better. Okay, the mapping sampler is better. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a really good. I'm glad you know the product so well. All right. Kathy had a difficult time moving upwards, like the star, like when she was doing the stars, and then I came down.
Totally normal.
Or I just come down on the other side. Is that normal? Okay.
Yeah, that's normal. Just break out that pitch of your pen and think butterfly thoughts. And what I mean by that is, or ladybug thoughts. When you were a kid, think back to when you were a kid and you were playing with bugs outside and you picked up a little pill bug or a ladybug or a butterfly and it was crawling around on your hand. Think about how lightly that was touching the surface of your hand. That's how you want to approach the surface of your paper with a nib. Allow the paper to come up and touch the tip of the pen rather than pressing down and like digging the pen into the paper.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Paula asked the best source for Roman sizes. Is that in relation to the nib? Did I miss something? Sorry.
Yeah. So the nibs that you're looking for, if you're looking for like a Romans style calligraphy, is the Speedball C nib. That's what you want. And really, they have tons of samplers for that, where they have like C0 all the way to C5. C5 being the smallest, the 0 being the biggest. And that's really great for playing around with different sizes.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think that, one more message. Okay, just a thank you. Lots of thank you. Lots of really great feedback in the chat, which is always awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Melissa. That was fantastic. I learned a ton. Now I want to go find my illuminated alphabet book, because that was like my favorite thing in the entire world, and you know, so break fun. It out. Yeah, exactly. So this has all been fabulous. We really appreciate it. And if we can, everybody turn to gallery view. In the upper right hand corner of your screen, go to view, change it from speaker to gallery, and if you would turn your camera on and show your work, we would be over the moon. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Kurt, Donna, Deb, Mary Jo,
all of our talented attendees. Carol. Look at what you get with a class of Paza, Melissa. Isn't this amazing?
Oh my gosh, you guys brought your A game.
This is
goodness gracious. This is amazing.
Yeah. Oh my
fantastic
gosh.
Work.
Great job, everyone. They look gorgeous. And I hope you use this in some fashion. You know, maybe you're all gonna make your own holiday cards now. We'll see. That's a lot of work.
Please do.
Yeah, exactly, right? Okay.
I mean, even if you make it by hand, scan it and print it,
Oh,
it
that
still
counts.
counts. Still
Totally
counts.
counts. Didn't even think about
Yeah,
that.
totally counts. You made it once.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all in next week's event as well. Take care. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime, Melissa. Thank you.